Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plaster, Senior Executive Editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly, and you're listening to EP Talk, a place where emergency physicians, aka ER docs, come and talk about things that are important to us, both professionally and personally sometimes. And my guests today, I have several that are all talking about an important topic: Ben Bassin, Nate Haas, and Sridhar Kota. And before they're going to talk a little bit about Aerosolve, a new isolation invention that they came forward with, dealing with COVID and obviously other things as well. The COVID pandemic has caused a lot of innovation required, and so this is one of them. And one of the things I wanted to say before we get into this, Ben, is that one of the real joys of that I've had over the last 25 years in Emergency Physicians Monthly is I've got to see emergency docs innovate. It's really been fun because I think it's in our blood. We're constantly faced with problems that are not the usual thing, and you see ER docs all the time building better mousetraps, and it's been a real pleasure from my standpoint to be able to highlight them, promote them. I can't tell you the number of new products and new approaches and things that have come out of the emergency medicine community that we've had an opportunity to highlight in EPM. So I'm really excited anytime I see something like this. So I'm going to ask you just some real basic questions about how'd you get into, or give me the background for the Aerosolve tent and helmet. And then Nate and Sridhar will kind of give us more the practical and the mechanical and the engineering part of it as we go forward. So give me the background, Ben. You're the I guess the originator. Is that not right?
I think it's really all of us. We're all a team, and we've kind of done this all together. And okay. Sridhar is the true originator. We've just taken it into clinical practice. So we're all from University of Michigan, and being a big academic university, we have access to lots of expertise across disciplines. And so we're fortunate. We actually have something called MCIRC, which is the Michigan Center for Integrative Research in Critical Care, which essentially allows us to span out of our silos across all the expertise in the university. And so it marries engineering with architecture, with business, with medicine, with innovation and entrepreneurship. And so using that kind of that vehicle, we've been able to collaborate to kind of bring this forward. And so that's kind of where it started. Is actually Sridhar, who's a mechanical engineer by training and quite accomplished, kind of brought it to us as a clinician, saying, his daughter is actually a medical student, brought to him with, hey, what if we kind of did this, NASA helmet kind of thing and put a vacuum on it? And couldn't we just maybe, everything that the patient's exhaling in the era of COVID, couldn't we maybe just pull it all out of there? And it would benefit the healthcare workers. And so Sridhar brought that to us. I'd obviously developed the idea a little bit, and then it evolved over multiple iterations. First into a helmet, which is for the patient to wear, which is a negative pressure helmet, which runs through a HEPA filter and basically captures whatever the patient exhales through a negative pressure portable system and a HEPA filter. And then that was kind of the first product line, I guess, if you will. And then the next thing evolved into that tent, which is a much bigger, more flexible environment for a range of procedures and clinical conditions that is also negative pressure and can be used in a variety of ways. And so this idea, through Sridhar came to us through MCIRC, and we kind of collaborated, and then we started just thinking about it and, using it on ourselves, doing particle testing, trialing it in healthy volunteers. And then now we've used it in COVID patients quite successfully. And so, again, they're both, continuing with the same theme, which is a portable negative pressure environment. It's essentially an extension of PPE for us. It's meant to protect the healthcare worker. Obviously, as you know, as an emergency physician, Mark, a longtime physician, there's fear around COVID, I think, even in the healthcare community.
You're absolutely right. That's one of the things that is absolutely pervasive right now, is the fear that we have. And it's obviously important that it works and it's correct mechanically. But when we have the right materials, when we have the right tools, then everyone becomes a little bit more at ease, can go back to doing their job. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah,
I think so. I think it solves several problems. One is it helps alleviate some of the fear that we have of treating, patients with a figuring out, and clearly is evolving faster than we can keep up. It keeps the workforce healthy to take care of more patients.
Yeah.
Potentially allows us to use therapies that otherwise people are afraid to use. So heated high flow oxygen, non-invasive ventilation, continuous nebulizer therapy. That's kind of within the domain of the helmet. The tent obviously branches out into tracheostomy, bronchoscopy, intubation, extubation. We've used it for ERCPs and EGDs. We've used it in the operating room, in the ICU and the ER and procedural suite. So it really has a wide range of applications, and that really, again, allows us to treat these patients with all the therapies that are available to us, not restricting us based on COVID.
Yeah, several of my friends, jumped in and started using the plexiglass or plastic boxes that the patients were sitting in, and it was kind of the right idea, but the fact that it was inflexible made it very, very difficult to use. And describe, if you will, the tent. Let's start with the tent, because describe what that looks like.
So the tent is essentially a reusable, almost like plastic U-shaped hoop base. It has PVC hoops over it, and it's got a clear plastic canopy. The canopy is disposable. It has a HEPA filter that kind of plugs into the base and is attached to a vacuum motor that is pulling air, negative pressure out through the HEPA filter.
Well, wait. Let me ask you. You said that the frame is reusable. The frame is reusable, but the plastic shield actually is dedicated to that patient, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So the frame, because it's all impermeable materials, gets wiped down with antiviral, solution or wipe, whatever you're using at your health system. Afterwards, can be reused. The canopy and the HEPA filter and the ductwork, which goes from HEPA filter to the motor itself, are all disposed of between patients. So there's really no carrying over of anything, obviously, between patients. And the canopy itself intentionally has no access holes cut in it. So it's highly flexible for the procedure. For the proceduralist, you can have up to 8 to 10 8-inch holes cut in it. And it still will not exhale or let any, particle or anything outside of it once the vacuum motor is turned on. So it's highly customizable for the number of proceduralists, their size, their stature, the procedure you're doing, the number of people you want to access the tent, which is very different, to your point, Mark, of the intubation box. The FDA is now coming back out and potentially talking about the emergency use authorization for the intubation boxes being reconsidered, because they may actually, make virus transmission worse, and worse first pass success and other things that are, crucial, make it more laborious and dangerous to intubate the patient. So this is very different. This is highly flexible. It is not a rigid box. You can cut the armholes wherever you want. It is customizable based on the procedure. And the biggest difference is that there's negative pressure. So it's constantly pulling everything out through the HEPA filter. Nothing gets outside the tent, no matter how many access holes you cut. So it's a very different platform.
Okay, so you know what it reminded me of, having grandkids now, and I spend a lot of time with strollers. And anyway, the stroller has these retractable sun visors that are outstanding, and that's what I thought of was an expanded visor that we use on the strollers. When the first time I saw that, it had the big hoops that went over from head to. Does it cover the entire body? Pretty much.
Up to probably like mid thigh or the knees.
Yeah, I sort of say it's almost the entire upper body, and it just sits over the bed, correct?
Yes, it's not attached to the bed.
Yeah, and the patient can actually sort of rest comfortably inside of it. It's like a little mini plastic tent over the top, and the key now you're talking about actually having holes cut in the side. Normally you would, if you need to do something with the patient, you would do it through the holes, correct?
Yes, everything's accessed through the holes. Yeah,
access through the holes, and so you wouldn't take the shield down to work with the patient. You just reach through the holes that have been. They're not pre-cut, are they? Or you can just.
We intentionally did not pre-cut them so that they can be customized for the proceduralists for the procedure at hand and used however they need to be used. So we intentionally didn't want to pre-cut, which is what the limitation of the intubation box is.
Right. And once those have been cut, of course, now you've got it's open to the outside air, but the very fact that it's negative pressure, you're pulling everything through that. Is that correct?
Correct. And so we've done fairly extensive particle testing. We've done fog testing. And once the vacuum motor is turned on, as long as you don't have more than 8 to 10, 8-inch holes or so in there, nothing escapes out through those holes. Everything is pulled through the HEPA filter and through the ductwork into the motor and cleaned.
So you can have 8 to 10 holes in there. I mean, we're talking about holes that you could reach your hand and arm through.
They're 8-inch holes. Yeah, you can. And again, we've used this in clinical care on patients. Now we've done tracheostomies, we've done bronchoscopy, intubation, extubation, everything, and ultrasound, and it is not an issue.
Well, Nate, you're the one I'm going to ask about the clinical experience with it. Ben is maybe are you the director of the program, or what's your academic role, Ben?
Mine, I'm an associate professor at University of Michigan Emergency Medicine, and then I'm the director of EC3, which is the biggest ED-ICU in the country. So gotcha. I kind of work at this interface of emergency medicine and critical care.
So, but the fact that you're at the top of that food chain tells me that you're probably not spending all night every night doing clinical work.
I do about half-time clinical work. Yeah, a lot of administrative work. Yeah.
Okay, but Nate's a different story, huh?
Yeah.
Not exactly.
In some ways, yes. I'm also I'm full-time clinical faculty at U of M, and so I work in the emergency department, but then also in the EC3, our ED ICU area that Ben runs, and so work clinically in both environments. I work a little bit more than Ben does clinically, but not a lot more because I know he's awfully busy. But yes, I'm definitely there a lot.
So, and you've had an opportunity to use this in a clinical setting, is that correct?
Yeah, so we've used each. So the two different devices, the helmet and the tent. And so the helmet's been used in, in the ED and in the ICUs, inpatient ICUs. And then the tent, we've had use in the ED, the ICU, the procedural areas, and ORs. So the helmet, we've had good success using on patients on heated high flow nasal cannula, including a patient that was being extubated from, liberated from the ventilator to heated high flow nasal cannula. And so sort of both ends of the, disease spectrum from early in the course till sort of the resolution tail end of the disease process. And so, there's a lot of different potential uses you can imagine along that spectrum. We've definitely had great feedback from nursing, respiratory therapy, various job families that are physically at the bedside doing a lot of the things we don't think about. And so specifically for the helmet, even we've had access using, IJ central lines, NG tubes and things like that. And so just a lot of different feedback from the various job families that have just such different interfaces with these patients than you or I might think of on a minute-to-minute basis. And so that's been really valuable.
So you put in IJs in the helmet or into the tent or both?
Yeah, so we actually haven't placed an IJ under the tent. You certainly could imagine it'd be feasible. We just admittedly haven't really been in this scenario to do so yet. What I was alluding to is a patient that was in the ICU who had an IJ central line that was COVID positive, was placed in a helmet. And so while wearing the helmet, the IJ central line is still accessible, able to be used for pressors and things like that.
Gotcha. Let's talk about the helmet for just a minute. Tell me about the helmet versus, say, a cap or PAP or a device. How are they different?
Yeah, so the helmet itself, there's a few sort of similar, devices you might see, but the helmet itself does not deliver oxygen. It is not a positive pressure delivery system. It is not a CPAP. And so instead, it's a negative pressure system that allows delivery of those other therapies. And so it's a negative pressure helmet that sort of goes over top of the patient to allow things like CPAP, heated high flow nasal cannula, nebulizers, et cetera, underneath. And so the goal is for the individual patient, we envision a benefit for the patient being able to be treated with these, day-to-day therapies that oftentimes are being avoided in the setting of COVID and the fear that Ben mentioned earlier. And so the helmet is not the delivery, it's more so the negative pressure allowance of those types of deliveries. And we think that it has potential to benefit the individual patient, but then keeping healthcare workers safe and potentially low resource environments, mitigating the need for lots of negative pressure rooms or the unavailability of negative pressure rooms in different low resource environments.
Right. I keep thinking that this is for the patient. I mean, that's a rather obvious assumption. You guys are with us every day. I keep thinking of cappers and pappers. That's for us, and we're talking about a helmet that's actually for the patient. And now, tell me a little bit about how comfortable is sleeping in a helmet or resting in a helmet? How does that work?
Yeah, so we've trialed it for several hours, both on ourselves, on healthy volunteers, and then in the clinical environment. And it's been tolerated just fine. We've had patients proned, awake proning while wearing the helmet. And for a period of a couple hours without any issue. There's, sort of like a motorcycle retractable visor. And so can eat through that, can, brush teeth or oral hygiene like that. And so really, the thing we were thinking about was, would there be claustrophobia with wearing a helmet? But if you haven't worn something like high flow nasal cannula, I think you take for granted just how much, hot air there is blowing in your face. And so actually the negative pressure, vacuum motor of the helmet actually clears that heat and actually provides, a level of comfort that we sort of didn't anticipate. The amount of heat that's coming off of the heated high flow nasal cannula is actually noticeable, and you get uncomfortable quickly. And so this actually dissipates some of that. And so there's actually, more comfort than we might have anticipated.
Gotcha. Do you ever switch back and forth between the helmet and the tent? Do you use them together, or when for a patient to rest, take the helmet off of them and put them in a tent? Is that considered?
Yeah, so it certainly could. I think it depends a bit, on the environment you're in, and the trajectory or movements through the hospital or anticipated procedures or things like that. The helmet definitely has a bit more flexibility, and so with a battery-powered vacuum motor, is portable, and we've used for transporting patients to imaging studies or from room to room or thing like that. Whereas as is the tent itself, the tent device has a plug, and so it's a bit more limited mobility from that standpoint in the current version. And so the portability is the upside of a helmet as compared to the tent, not reliant on a battery and potentially longer use.
Yeah, got it. Sridhar, tell me about your how you came about you said your daughter's a medical student, and she came to you with the idea, said, "Dad, figure this out."
So this was in early March. Received an email from our physicians at the University of Michigan asking engineering faculty if they can come up with a way to contain the virus. The email actually said about there's a, instead of intubating patients, which is risky, as you all know, and there's a non-invasive way to treat the patients with the oxygen through nasal cannula, but the aerosolization risk is heavy, is great. That's why they don't want to use it. So they talked about there are negative pressure rooms, but there aren't very many. That's not a scalable option. So if they wanted to see how we can contain the virus, and I got excited about the project itself because this is immediate. This is going to help people. And I volunteered. And then later that evening, my daughter, she's a first-year medical student, she came. I was telling her about this. This email came. I'm really excited about helping. And something about negative pressure room. I asked her, I did not know there is a negative pressure room. And what's a negative pressure room? And she explained, and then she happened to be seeing that in her previous scribe experience some time ago. Anyhow, so we talked about it. I thought right away that instead of, the virus going, the point source is here, why spread the virus throughout the room and then vacuum it? Why not capture it where the virus is?
Right.
And she suggested about putting a helmet on, like containing it, and I said we got to vacuum it, and that's how we talked for an entire 10 or maybe less than 15 minutes on this, and the idea is to put a helmet and a vacuum made so much sense, and I was not sure if I really understood the problem. I said, it can't be that simple. And then she actually said, what else is there to it? And that's what got me a little courage to email our friends, Kevin Ward, and then from then on to Dr. Bassin and then to Nate Haas about this idea. And then later on, I discussed this idea with my colleagues at my company, Fluxus. I asked them to come up with other ideas that are better and came up with a tent idea. So that's how we got started. And they gave a lot of feedback in terms of what works and what doesn't. And we made number of changes. I think the idea that there is sufficient negative pressure to draw room air from underneath the shroud into the helmet. That's what makes it very comfortable, as Nate pointed out. So same thing with the tent. Again, there is the negative pressure room does 12 air exchanges an hour. The helmet, you're pumping in 60 liters a minute from what they told me, and then the oxygen. And then the vacuum we used was 320 liters a minute. So it does actually 22 times more air exchanges an hour than a negative pressure room, not to mention that you're not spreading the virus throughout the room. And then the tent does 50 times as much, actually 60 times. Tent does more like 12 air exchanges a minute, and the negative pressure room does 12 air exchanges an hour.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's a very simple concept, and it seemed to help people.
Yeah, it's a smaller volume, of course, and being able to pull that out. We started out talking about fear, and I want to ask you, Nate, you mentioned claustrophobia, and obviously one of the things that we have to deal with the patients is obviously they're afraid they're going to die, but in the middle of all this, they're put into these isolation sets, and it's very obviously isolating, and there's a lot of fear induced. Have you been able to, with the tent, does that help them? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, definitely. I know patients can be so isolated, in the absence of visitors and the strict isolation rules that we have right now that are so tough. We've actually had patients in the helmet, FaceTiming spouses at home or having phone conversations with spouses and communicating with us easily. And so in both the helmet and the tent, sort of the biggest risk we could envision is claustrophobia, but reassuringly, we haven't noticed that with any of our patients we've used it on, or with ourselves trying out each. And so in some ways, it's the opposite. We're able to facilitate phone conversations and FaceTime and things like that, both with family members at home and then also with members of the clinical team in the hospital. And so in this particularly isolating climate that we're in, unfortunately, it is nice that instead of being on a ventilator and being on a aerosolizing therapy like CPAP or high flow nasal cannula, it keeps that communication stream open.
Gotcha. Ben, let me ask you this: has it changed what the caregivers are wearing? Now, obviously, we've got a helmet on the patient, or the patient's in a tent. Are you confident enough that you would allow the caregivers not to be wearing the cappers or capper gear? When you're using these, do people then just use an N95 mask and be done?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. So I think, what I think and what I'm confident in versus what, in a hospital health system from the top up or top down is going to be confident in are different things. But that's why I think we're going through the proper channels of the FDA approval so that we can do those things, because we've done extensive air particle testing and really nothing escapes the helmet or the tent to put any caregiver in harm's way or risk, we think, from aerosolization or virus transmission. That being said, it's a big leap to say, don't wear your PPE in the room because it works so well, even though I think that's probably true. And so we are going through the emergency use authorization with the FDA now to kind of prove that. And I think once it's FDA approved, that will change hospitals' approach to kind of PPE regulations when the tent or helmet is being used. But because it's still being used under what we call an innovative care protocol, which means it's very low risk. If anything, it provides benefit, and there's really no risk other than claustrophobia, as Nate said. Right. The benefit certainly outweighs any risk, and so we're using it, but we're still not asking anybody to downgrade their PPE that they would wear at this point. But our goal is, once it goes through FDA approval, that it is kind of proven therapy that you could probably do that.
Yeah.
And I think, to echo off of that, I think in a lot of ways we sort of envision it as an extension of PPE. In a lot of ways it's helpful to the patient, but it's, a lot of ways an extension of traditional PPE that has upsides and benefits for healthcare workers. And so as of today, not in place of, but more so an extension to.
Well, I'm not necessarily, looking to get rid of, PPE for providers, but we all know that if you're working in an environment where you're walking from one case to the next, to the next, to the next, that's a pretty expensive, time-consuming, don and doff, of gear. And if there is a way to isolate the patient cost effectively, but effectively, and diminish the cost and time and whatnot of the providers, it seems to me like that's probably a larger advantage than we might think. I mean, for crying out loud, look how difficult it was for us to get PPE in adequate volumes. So maybe this would actually diminish that cost. You would be able to go, with one set safely from one patient to the next. And also, I don't know about your facility, but when we got a positive patient, then that room goes down for, an hour or two, and in a high volume ED or a setting like that, that can, man, that's such a hassle. That room is dead now for an hour, 2 hours, depending on the rules in your given hospital. So yeah, if you could diminish the contamination of the patient to the room and the patient to the provider, by essentially focusing on keeping them isolated rather than isolating the room and the provider and everybody else, that seems like that's a better approach.
And to that point, I've got a feeling this is what Ben's going to chime in too, but to that point, I think the operating room procedural suites is a huge opportunity from that standpoint. And so, many of our hospitals were financially hit so hard amidst the last several months. Big parts of economic recovery plans are trying to, generate revenue from procedures that were canceled for the last several months. And so having used the tent in operating rooms and procedural suites, you can envision sort of maybe that downtime of cleaning and how long a room is offline for. If we can contain everything, as you mentioned, I think there's potentially ways to shorten that interval and maximize that efficiency as well. And so I don't know if Bennett wants to chime in on that as well, but that's something we're, actively exploring.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to expand on your comment, Mark, I think the other thing, even within the ED, is, we are fortunate. We're really well resourced. We're about 100 bed ED, and we have probably 10 or 11 negative pressure rooms, which I would gather to say is a lot more than most places have.
That's not my reality. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and it's not most places, right? And even in our extremely fortunate environment, we still run out as faster than we can keep up. So again, it creates a portable negative pressure environment. So anywhere the patient is negative pressure. So a lot of, hospitals that we've been talking to, especially the more inner city hospitals, with potentially less resources and higher volumes of these patients, are looking towards, when they come as a PUI or person under investigation, we don't know their COVID status when they show up. We know they're hypoxic, they have a fever, they're short of breath, they have symptoms that are concerning, but we don't have a COVID test back. You can put them in a helmet, and I mean, in theory, you can put them in the hallway. You can put them, in any room, and they are isolated. And so that room doesn't get taken down for cleaning, but also they're not infecting other healthcare workers, other patients, and they're isolated until we know what their status is. And so we've used the tent for people who come in, emergently in extremis in respiratory failure, respiratory arrest, and need to get intubated. We don't know their status. We'll put the tent on them, intubate them, and leave them in the tent. And then later on, when their COVID comes back negative, then we remove the tent. So it really gives you this portable negative pressure environment. The other thing that it really allows you in terms of kind of resource utilization is, in theory, it's keeping people off ventilators, right? Because we can use heated high flow, we can use non-invasive, we can use NEVs, we can use other therapies for respiratory failure, hypoxic respiratory failure, hypercarbonic respiratory failure, and avoid, the strategy early on, as you know, was early ventilators, like get them on the ventilator early,
right?
And then we're running out of ventilators. And so
right.
This is keeping people off. It's allowing more ventilators to be in circulation, be used for other patients. And it's also allowing us to take people off sooner, because at least in our hospital, people stay on 21 days until they can be trached because of COVID and the risk for that. And so now they can be trached under the tent and taken off within 7 days and return that ventilator to circulation, also liberate that patient from the ICU potentially now that they're trached. So it just allows the supply chain to function more efficiently as well.
Yeah, that's actually, it's just changing the way we view the problem. Isolated over the patient instead of the room and the doctor and everybody else adjusting. Let's isolate the patient. And the fact, Sridhar, that it's actually a better air exchange is phenomenal. I don't want to get away from that. If you can exchange the air in a room 20 times, 50 times in an hour, my goodness, that's got to be an improvement.
It's 20 times more than what the room does. 20 to 50 times more than what the room. Yes.
And we're in a smaller volume situation, more like a community hospital, and we've got these things sitting in the rooms, and they portable units that are sitting in the room sucking, exchanging the air. It's like walking into a airplane hangar. It's the roar. It's very disconcerting to the patient. First off, I'm wearing a mask. I'm wearing a face shield. They can barely hear me to start with, and we've got them in a mask, and then we've got this thing roaring in the corner, and finally, you're saying I either have to get down in their face to understand them, to hear them, or heaven forbid, lower your mask, and that's not exactly what you want. So what I was leading up to, Nate, is sound. One of the big issues for me is the sound in the room, because I think, again, that's disconcerting to a patient. Are these relatively quiet?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good comparison. It's sort of just a soft hum of a little battery-powered motor, essentially. And
where's it located? Actually in the bed with them, or is it on the floor, or where is it located?
Yeah, for the tent, there's a fan that sits on the floor, probably 6 to 8 feet away from the patient.
Okay.
And so it sort of sounds like a little, it's a portable fan, and so just a little hum. The helmet itself is a little apparatus that's about waist level for the patient, and similarly just a soft hum. And so both of them, we've had phone conversations while underneath and while inside the helmet and things like that. So definitely quieter than you allude to, and no issues from the standpoint of communication.
Got it.
And there are ways we can isolate the noise later on if that is an issue, although right now it doesn't seem like an issue, but there are many ways we can make them very quiet.
Yeah. Great.
Well,
thank you, gentlemen. You've been, it's enlightening. Now, obviously, our listeners might be interested in hearing more about it. First off, is it commercially available, or are you just still in the testing phase? And if people would like to get that device in their hospital, how do they do it?
We have made several prototypes of the tent through my company, and what Ben and Nate have used them on a number of patients, as they already mentioned, but now taking to higher volume, first of all, getting the FDA approval. So we are in the process of preparing the FDA application. That process itself takes a while, because we have identified a manufacturer who can produce them at scale, and having that manufacturer produce the same units we did and have them tested at FDA approved facilities. We need to do all of this before we submit the application. So that's where we are at. To the short answer to that, it's going to be another 4 weeks or so before we can submit the application, and 3 weeks from that point on, hopefully we'll get the emergency use authorization. That's for the tent. And we are similarly ramping up the process on the helmet as well. in the process of identifying manufacturers, FDA-approved manufacturers, and then going through the similar process. So I would say tent, it's going to be maybe 2 months from now, we'll be able to provide them to people,
Okay.
FDA-approved. Helmet's probably going to be a bit longer because it's going to take a little while before we, maybe 3 months or 3.5 months from now, we'll be able to provide the helmet.
Right. I see that the helmet is basically an extrusion plastic helmet, so that is a little bit of manufacturing issues to put that thing together, but certainly the tent would be a little easier to manufacture.
Well, just I want to point out the helmet you've seen in the photos and videos. That's the industrial helmet that I went and quickly bought it and then used a shop vac from Home Depot.
Yeah.
But then we modified it further. But now, just to another point about the helmet is the hard structure, the shell in the front, the liftable face shield, and the little bit of structure to attach it to a hose that comes at the top of the crown. The rest of it is all soft. It's a Tyvek, so in terms of comfort for the patient.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a plastic molding process. As you said, it can be done. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of getting the FDA approval. That is the one that's taking the time.
Right. Well, if users want to stay on top of this and get one when they're available, where how would they access that? Through a website? What do you anticipate that?
You can get the information on the medical side of the MCERC website, which Ben will provide that, and also we created a startup recently. It's called InspireRxLLC.com.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you, gentlemen. This is, like you say, it's fun to watch something at its invented and nascent stages and responding to a real need. And I think you've actually potentially improved the patient experience, but also the physician experience. So thank you very much for joining us here for EP Talk. And for our listeners, I hope to see you again. Take care.